Okay, so for those of you that are brand new, we'll do a quick introduction. My name is Jessica Castaneda. I work as the director of IDRC, and I am here with Gloria. Gloria, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Gloria Altamirano. I'm the project director, data and records coordinator. I've been with the MEP program for 20 plus years. And I'm from Ohio.
Very good. So with IDRC, we have some work groups we have projects that we're supposed to do each year. And one of our work groups is related to data reconciliation. And so there are about 5 or 6 members of that. Gloria is one of the members. And what we do is try to look at what are the needs of states related to data collection and what resources IDRC can put out that would be helpful for everybody. And so we've discussed several things that we feel like would be helpful, but we really wanted to have this summit to get information out, but also to get information from you. We realize that every state is different, your amount of experience is different. So we want you to start being able to getting to know other people. So in HUVA, we do really encourage that you'll go in and look at some of the community boards, reach out to others. But we're hoping over time that data staff really know who to reach out in other states. We feel like that's one of the beauties of being a member of the consortium is you get to know people from other states and who to pick up the call, and call and say, hey, how are you handling this? So we're hoping the meetings start kind of providing some context for people and then also some ideas of who you can reach out. So hello, everyone that's joining us. And so Gloria and I are going to kind of go back and forth. She'll be sharing kind of her perspective on how she does things in her state. I'm going to be going big picture on some of the things that just in general, like if you're brand new, if you've been there 20 years, I apologize if I'm sharing some stuff that you're very well versed in, but we're coming from the direction of if someone's all the way brand new to all the way experienced, of some tips, some ideas, and just some thoughts of the data that we're supposed to be keeping. So if you're brand new, some of you I know when you registered, there were some that have just joined here in the last couple of weeks. All states are using the national COE. So if you're trying to figure out your migrant data, we know that all the COE data has to be put into your system. And so the systems look different from every state. There's a lot of MIS 2000 states. There's a lot of other types of tools that people are using to put their data in, but everyone has to keep this national COE data. And then, like we just mentioned in the last presentation, all of that data then has to be stored. It goes from your state database and then it's sent to MSIX. And so if you don't have an MSIX account and you're working with data, you definitely want that. But what we wanted to talk about today is knowing that, MSIX also has another role. Like, it says here, when students make moves, we've got to get that information in as quick as possible. We're trying to make sure that that credit information is there, that key information to help the student get from place to place. Like in the last one they mentioned, what do you do if a student is enrolled in another state is putting enrollments and they're now in your state? We should be keeping track of our kids really well. And that's a challenge that requires someone who is multiple people who are really focusing on that. If we really get to the heart of the issue, if we have good data, our migrant kids will be served better, their needs will be met faster. And in my mind, you have IDNR and then data right after that, and then services. We have to be working together or we're doing a really disjointed migrant program. But one other thing is OME is also looking at, and I don't know if any of them are with us, some of them might be with us, but CSPR data, you're looking at your data validity, you're looking at the logic issues, and you're also trying to make sure that those numbers that you turn in on your consolidated performance report actually equal out the numbers that are in your system. And so there are reports and tools that we have for this. And so with IDRC, we feel like there's more structure and resources that need to be developed for you guys, for those that are doing data. Like Gloria was talking the other day in our meeting, and just some of the things that she said, a couple of the other members said, hey, I'd love to learn how you do that. There's got to be more sharing, more resources that are available. I know in the last meeting, Brenda Meyer mentioned in Colorado that she has a really good, a manual that would be great. So one of the things, there are several things that we thought might be helpful. And these are some ideas that we have. And then we want to, as we share, if you see something else that we should really have on our radar, if you'll put that in the chat box, and then we can kind of, we're going to break down a little bit more of the actual data of what we're supposed to be gathering. But some things that we thought might be helpful is a repository of sample documents. So Gloria has something in Ohio. Gloria, what documents would you have that you would be willing to share, just right off your head, that you can think related to data?
Well, we have our manual it's one that we started when MSIX provided it. So it was kind of like a template for you to use, and then you just changed it to whatever you are actually doing or using in your own state. And so that's what we're using here in Ohio. We have transfer documents, secondary credits, which are for our high school students, which ask to have all the data about the credits that they take, and whether it's hours or if it's actual credit that they earned while they were with us in Ohio during the summer or in the fall and spring. And those types of documents, attendance also that, we have to have for all the students. So there's different forms like that that we can share with other states if they're not using something like that already.
Yeah, I think that some of you guys are just barely starting and you're trying to figure out like, okay, what is the list of what I'm supposed to have? So one of the things we've noticed in working with our work group is process documents. Like last year, we made a residency move verification document of what are the good processes of what you should do to verify that your kids are here. Like we mentioned, if someone's putting in enrollment for a student, but they're actually not in their state, how are we ensuring that the students that we have, beginning of the program year on 9/1 are actually present? And if they're not, what's the process that we use to verify that? So tools like that we have been working on with IDRC, and I'll put in the chat box here and the an example of that. But we're also right now we're currently working on the processes that you do related to a move notification. Like I just mentioned in the last presentation about, certain people can close move notifications and certain people can only see it. So how do you ensure, what is the full process? I get a move notification in MSIX. What do I do? Do I have process in place? Do I just close it, or before I close it, what are all the steps? And so we also realize that there's other things that are processes that need to exist that maybe just come as second nature, that to someone that's brand new and has just started doing migrant data, they don't know what they don't know. So Ray says a video library, maybe short videos on how to run MSIX reports, use MSIX Praxis fake data to show the steps to follow when running a report. That's a very good example. Someone else asked about the PowerPoint. Yes, it's always under the handouts there. Okay, so sample data manuals, sharing of resources. So a whole nother thing is states that are MIS 2000 states. I worked in Tennessee for about 17 years and we were an MIS 2000 state. And a lot of times it was really helpful. I remember Kentucky shared with us how they were doing certain dashboards in MIS 2000. And I could go back and say, hey, we really like this. But a lot of times that information wasn't shared super well between states. It's kind of like you figure out your system, you go in, you work with MIS 2000. Meanwhile, someone else has already figured this out. So it might behoove a lot of us to share how you're doing things, and so they can see what that looks like. Got this thing covering my other part. And then we thought of maybe some sort of yearly data training or conference. And so I looked we did a poll in the last one. We asked if you want in person or virtual, and it was kind of a split with more wanting virtual. It may need to be virtual. It may, but the idea that you come together and you guys present and we're able to share, and you really know who to reach out and really be able to get that information. So we felt like these are the areas that everyone should have data about. And this is the things that should be on your radar. If you just dabble in a little bit of data, you may not know of all these things, but you should know of these things. You want to know how your data goes into the state data, how it all works together. So all states should be gathering their COE data. Vaughn mentioned in the last presentation, which I thought was really good, where he's pulling his data from his state database, he's pulling MSIX, he's comparing, and he's actually doing a count to make sure that they're equaling out. So that COE data, you should know, if you were to put them all on paper, I've got 195 COEs. Like there should be some checks of actually sometimes going back and saying, do we have every kid in there? Are we missing anything? Then you have this whole area of MSIX data elements. Then you have your services data. So what are you actually doing with students, and how's that going? How's that being recorded? Then there's this data that you use to understand the population in your services. And Bruce mentioned in the last presentation, using an MSIX report to be able to compare numbers between one county to another. So that may not be exactly how MSIX was envisioning this to be used, but it's a perfect example of understanding your population and your services. And then there's this whole other side of quality control. So if we have good quality control, we know when our kids are there, we know that our kids are actually eligible, and we have processes in place to really, to really meet those needs. Gloria, anything comes to mind that you think that, do you think that they're all equal? Do you spend more time on one area than another? In your mind, how does this all lay out?
I pretty much think it's all equal, and I like the way that these pillars are because it does COE data. The IDNR part comes first, because until you identify a student, you cannot service them. So you got to make sure you have that COE and that they're eligible. And then, with those minimum data elements, that's where it starts. And then your service data is what services your programs are giving to those students. Here come more minimum data elements. And then using those reports to compare with your CSPR to make sure that, what is your error rate compared to the data that's in MSIX. And just like Bruce had said, we do the same thing. You pull your reports from MSIX, you pull your reports for your own state database, and then you compare those, and they should match. If they're off, then there's usually a way to drill down and check that data and see why it is that you're off. And it may just be a clerical error that you can fix, and then your data is going to match. So, that's the one thing about using your MSIX is that it drills down to the student, and you can check your database to make sure that those are the students, and they'll tell you you're off by 7 students, and these are the 7 that we do not count for you. And you can check those 7 students to see why it is that they may not be counting them and you are, and then maybe you're counting some and they're not. So it's just checking that. And the quality control comes from the beginning of the COE. You have to have your quality control on that data, and then all the data after that to make sure that everything is clean, valid data.
I think that's a really good point. I was working with a program in the summer, and there actually was we had worked with several families who had not known anything about the program. And then in looking at some of their data, it was like that they had been served by everything. And you think, okay, we may focus so much on quality control on COEs, like is this ineligible? And then we may let everyone just put that they serve the world, and there's never a chance to check back. And then you talk to families and they're saying, I don't even know what the migrant program is. And so it's interesting that this idea of good quality control across the board has to happen. And it really does impact all areas. And so we were trying to actually think of, sometimes you're new to data entry and you're new to migrant ed, and you're trying to figure out all this stuff. And so we were thinking about, a lot of areas. We were doing some new director training recently, and we had a very well-seasoned director write one of the new directors, and he said, oh, there are so many layers of learning that have to happen in migrant ed. So if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, it's normal. This is what happens. But the good thing is you can start meeting other people that have done this for a while and can tell you how they do those different things. And so this COE, just to put this in there, because we are a IDR, Identification Recruitment Consortium. This is something that we're seeing a lot in a lot of places, is this idea of quality control and what that really looks like. And I just wanted to put this in here that, so, when you get a COE, COEs, states all have to have procedures set up on how they meet their quality control. How do you ensure that your data is correct? And it starts with that COE. So first of all, COEs should be, they're entered, they should be reviewed in a timely manner. And then there should be some sort of system that not only looks that logically they make sense on the form, but actually reaches back and does some contact with families. And so I'm a big proponent of that. In my history of working with migrant ed, sometimes we want to think that everything's perfect, but you are talking to people. There will be discrepancies. There are things that are going to happen. So it's not always a gotcha situation. It could be that you talk to mom and she says dad does some job, and then you talk to dad and it was totally different. But this idea that there's got to be, this validity in the data. So you want to make sure that your COEs, if there are any problems, those are fixed right away. And then it should be entered in the system if it's not done already electronically, and they should be approved, and hopefully services for those children should begin as quick as possible. But Gloria, what happens right after you get the COE? What do you have? It's not so easy as just, COE and services. What all are you thinking about when you once you get a new COE in place?
For us in Ohio, as soon as we get a COE, a temporary copy is encrypted and sent to the MEP program, so that way they know that that student is eligible and that they can start services. And here in Ohio, we have 3 eyes that look at the COE. So we have QC1, QC2, QC3. So, you know, one person reviews it, the other person, our IDNR coordinator, then reviews it, approves it, and then I review it and input it. So we're going through 3 pairs of eyes. If anyone is out in the field or is doing a technical assistant visit or for whatever reason out of the office, then, you know, we're oftentimes taking iPads with us to wherever we're going so that we can still go ahead and continue the process. Because to meet that 10-day timeline, you really need to be on this all the time, almost 24/7. You know, so that you're getting it in on time like it should be. And so by that time, you know, that's why we're hurrying up and giving that program that temporary copy so they can start the services. Because in the past, you know, we used to have to mail that in the mail. So that copy, that recruiter would have to bring in that COE and then send it on, and it would just took a long time. So now at least electronically, it's a little bit faster. But it still takes a little bit of time from identifying and then providing those services.
Now you mentioned 10 days in the chat box. Anyone know what she's talking about with 10 days? Are you thinking, what is she talking about with 10 days? Let's see. So we have we have a review and approve COE. Anybody else? COE submitted to MSIX. What are you guys thinking? She's got a 10 days to be reviewed, to review and approve, So we all have this. We just heard OME talk to us about, and MSIX staff talk about the minimum data elements. And this is one of the challenges. Once you get those kids right away, you have a COE. The next process is you have minimum data elements that were already gathered on the COE, but there's a whole bunch more that need to be added. And so one of the things that we did in Tennessee was try to develop a form to say, what are all the data elements and what do we need? Because we had so many and we couldn't get it all from one site, and we didn't always have access to our state, like student records, not just our migrant ed database. And so we actually came up with a form that was like a student form that we sent out to all districts, whether they receive migrant funds or not. And we started to gather the minimum data elements that were required just right away. And so one of the things that I found really interesting is we all do this process different. This gathering these MDEs looks totally different across the country. So some of you are able to automatically get it from a state database. Some of you are literally looking at each piece of this and reaching out. So I would love to see in the chat box, and then Gloria, if you'll kind of walk us through kind of what you guys do. What do you do in gathering minimum data elements? And maybe before I even do that, OME does have a listing of all of those elements. And so I want to go ahead and pull those up. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, this should help you. If I can share this. I'm going to go ahead and open this up. So my computer sounds like it wants to be an airplane. So hopefully you can see it. Okay, so these are these data elements that are required. And like they mentioned in the last training, some are not, you know, depending on the age of the child, you may not gather all of it. But Gloria, what is your process on kind of gathering the MDEs?
For us, the first MDEs we get right away are the MDEs from the student demographics, which is on the COE. Okay, and that we put in as soon as possible, you know, before, hopefully within those 10 days. We try and do those within 3 days is kind of our goal for us to do. There will be a few that are a little bit longer because of putting them in pending, because we need for the recruiter to go back to the parent and clarify or verify some information to make sure that that's correct. And then from there, we have the forms that the MEP programs fill out to show what services they're providing to the students, their secondary credit, how they're being serviced with either reading, math, science, whatever it may be. And then after that, starting September 1st, we do the re-verification where we verify what students are here in the state of Ohio, which starts our count for the next performance period. So there's different time frames when you're going to be collecting the data. There's certain time frame when we start asking the schools for the state assessment for reading and math data to get that from them and then get it into our system, which then goes up into MSIX. So it's different steps throughout the whole year, but it is a continuous cycle of maybe data that we collect ourselves, the other data we're requesting and trying to get from school districts. So it just depends on what data elements it is that you need to collect.
I think that kind of hints to the complexity of what it is. There's a big long list that I'm still scrolling down. So if you've never seen this, make sure I put it in the chat box. You can just access it right there, and it'll give you a little bit of information as far as what else it's needing. And it'll give you, there's a bunch of information that has to be gathered. We had a question: if the reviewer signs a COE 3 months after the recruiter did, should it be accepted or should they do it again? I mean, if a reviewer, that's your state process. We're just saying that it needs to be as quick as possible, because that means that child was in limbo literally for 3 months. And it depends why it was in limbo. Maybe there was a reason. I mean, that would be totally an internal decision that your state would need to make on how you handle that. Our recommendations is that you have, like Gloria mentioned, she's actually taking her iPad with her at different places to make sure that if something's coming in, she's checking that out as quick as possible. So, this idea of the MDEs, there's a whole bunch that needs to be gathered. And so let me go back to the slides here and make sure that you can kind of see that and I'm sharing the right thing.
And when MSIX first started back in 2007, it was only 25 minimum data elements, and now there's like 71. So, yeah, you know, there's been more and more required data elements, and I think that's why they're putting it up for comment. For those that they, you know, people can comment and say which ones they feel, you know, maybe need remove, that, you know, if they're more difficult for you to get because it's not a data element that you can get, you've requested, but there's, you know, you don't get it. Maybe that could be a reason why you're requesting for that to be removed. I know that they've asked for immunizations to be put in there, and they, you know, they can't do that. The only thing is the flag, do you have records on file or not, the immunizations. And so, you know, we can request or ask for things to be added or removed. But then the final say on that is from OME.
Yeah. We had a comment that says for new MEP state coordinators, process and procedure documents related to MSIX from other states would be very helpful. That is one of the things that if your state is willing to gather, you know, to share anything that you have, one of our goals with IDRC is to actually have kind of a repository of just example documents that people can go in and share and, you know, upload anything they want to share, but also review anybody else's. We feel like that historic, I mean, just to not have to start from scratch is super helpful. And there are some really good ones that are out there that you see, wow, that's a good idea. I never thought about putting that process in. So definitely a good suggestion. And if anyone is willing, I'll put my email in, you know, my email is everywhere. So it's all over IDRC, but if you go on there and you send me a message, we'll definitely start gathering that. And that's one thing that Gloria's group is also, the work group is looking at, to put those, as many as they possibly can, and they're sharing themselves. Everyone's okay. So the next one is just an example. This is an example shared from New York State. Will Messier shared this with me, and I thought it was just a really good example of them, you know, what they share with their districts or with their staff, to say, okay, you know, you have this idea of all these minimum data elements that were required, but how, is there any sort of cheat sheet, any sort of way that I can see what I need to get for different groups? And I just liked how they broke it down. And so he's got in red everything that you get from the COE. And then in green, he's saying, okay, this is collected by the, you know, the data entry person. And it should be entered within 48 hours. And then blue, they have their tutors collect, you know, these things. So if they're going to continue to serve a student, and, you know, if there's any sort of medical alerts or language indicators, this is something that the tutors would put that information in. And then orange, he has data collected from the transcript. And then purple, this refers to the assessment, and it's due as the scores are released. So I just shared the presentation. It is in there. You can just pull it out as you need. But I really liked this idea. So you want to make sure that that in your state that you've got a way to make sense of it all. And I felt like this was a really good document to just kind of, a quick reference. Sometimes the big, huge MDE one is a little bit overwhelming and you're thinking, how does this relate to each student? And so this is just an example. And so if states have examples of things like this, this is the kind of stuff that we would love to get, because it just shows, hey, this is how it's done. And so kudos to New York. Thank you for sharing that with us. We believe in sharing anything that we think is good. And this was a really good one that we thought was super helpful. So just to ask you guys, how are you gathering those data elements in the chat box? Is it something similar like this that like New York has, that you have different pots, different people gathering different things? Do you do anything different? If you want to share in the chat box, I think it would be helpful just for everyone to see just the breadth of it really truly does look different in just about every state. So if you have something that you think is working really well, feel free to share with us in the chat box before we move on to our different area.
Yeah, and every state is required to gather all those minimum data elements. So everybody's collecting the same information, but it just may be different people collecting different pieces of data.
Yeah. So then you have, to complicate it a little bit more, and this is a document that I believe I need to send, it's included in the, the presentation, that you have these time frame that, you have the minimum data elements, and then you have within the minimum data elements, things that you have to do within a certain amount of time. I don't know, Gloria, do you want to talk about some of these? Maybe how you handle some of these?
And I have these same pictures within some of my training as well. So that way, the recruiters know, the TR clerks, which would be our data specialists, know also the time frames for getting a new COE, the time frame for putting secondary credit into MSIX. And that way they know, why it is that we're trying to get this data in right away and review the data before it goes in, because it needs not only to be data that you're putting in there, but the data has to be correct and valid, and it needs to make sense, because otherwise that data in there is not going to make sense to another state if you don't have the minimum data in there the way it should be. Sometimes our states, sometimes our data specialists get confused with an actual half a credit or hours that they worked on and they received here that another state can use to add on and then award that credit in their state. So, there's the different ones that what I was talking about, the 10 working days of approving a new COE for the migratory child, that's number 2. The number 3 is the secondary credits that need to be in also within 10 days of approving that new COE. If you have any of that, that needs to be in there right away. And then the 30 calendar days, once you get the information, like your summer term is over, then all that data needs to be in within 30 calendar days of the end of that school term. For the fall term, same thing. If it's the end of November when your fall term is over, 30 days from that day, which would be the end of December, you would have to have all those minimum data elements into MSIX. So that's how all of these go, and it's just telling you the time frame within you have to have that in there.
We had a question that said that there was just a slide that was in the last presentation that mentioned the MDs. I believe the ones that he was mentioning are when it can be pushed out. That, remember with Ben's slide, he was mentioning like these elements have to be included or else it's not gonna, it'll get pushed out for data validity or for problems with that. So
Right.
We have the legal reference or the information on the MDs. I posted in the chat box the PDF that specifically has the listing of all the minimum data elements. For the sake of time, Ben and them did not go over every single one of them. But this information here is the ones that specifically have these timeframes that need to be met. And so this document is from MSIX. It's right. You can get it, from your account in there. You can see this. These are things that have to be met. And so, whoa, sorry, I jumped ahead. I meant to look at the chat box. So it's just, like Gloria said, these are things that, end of term, you've got the students, course information, it needs to get in within 30 days. So there are some that, like, what happens if you get a request from another state? I think there's one on here that mentions, you know, number 12, you receive a request for information from another state or another department. It's supposed to be responded. You're supposed to send that within 10 working days. And so this is something that needs to move very quickly, that some of us may not even be aware that we're supposed to be doing this, or you see it in your work orders of the things you need to do on M6, but you're not sure what to do with it. And so a few more comments. Let's see. It says, it would be nice to be able to securely upload the official transcript. This would take out the confusion as to convert credit hours, etc. So this, I think, would be
the same thing as with the immunizations. You can't have a document like that embedded into M6. And so transcripts cannot be embedded either. And that's why that's one of the minimum data elements. It has to have either the credit hours or the full credit or half a credit that they earned. And from there is how you gather that data and either combine it with yours, or you know, that might be all the data that they have.
So there are a lot of things we wish, but right now the reality is, you know, we need to gather these. And so I think if you have suggestions, we have no power over whether they change anything with M6. We have absolutely nothing, you know, no power at all. So I think those are the kind of things that you can provide to OME or to M6, those suggestions, and I'm sure they're hearing those. It says, is there any OME guidance as to what documents are permitted to be shared between MEP? That I know that they have, you know, oh, your state MEP. Melanie, you want to give us more examples of what you're meaning by that? Like what kind of documents that you're sharing? Okay, and while we wait for her. So here's a question. Which MDEs, I noticed somebody said it's a real challenge to get, you know, all the data that you need. Where do you think is your greatest struggle with getting the information, you know, of any of those particular MDs, if you're familiar with it? If you're not familiar with it, then you can just kind of see what people are saying. So it says, and Melena's question, is there any OME guidance as to what documents are permitted to be shared between MEP requests for COEs? And Ray says, in Florida, we don't share COEs with other states. All the information to COE is already in M6. That's a great point. You know, you can see that. What's Vaughn said. Kim, it can vary state to state.
Even though he says that all the information on the COE is in M6, it really isn't. It just has the from one state to the other and the dates.
Yeah,
it
definitely
doesn't have all the other, like, what were they working in and stuff like that. And in each state, you have to do your own COE. So like, we don't use, even though we may request that information, we don't use that COE to determine eligibility. We do our own interview here in Ohio, and then we go ahead and do our COE. It may be, if the move to Ohio does not qualify, then maybe we would use the previous move to Florida, for example. But normally we do our own interview to get that COE for Ohio. It's not like, okay, we're going to take Florida and just use that information. That's not how it works.
I was trying to look in the chat box to see if anyone from OME was, I mean, in our participants, to see if anyone from OME was still with us to answer that.
And I think it looks like most of the people are, several people, is the secondary data is what, and the assessment information.
Yeah.
I know for us here in Ohio, it's the state testing that's the hardest for me to collect, because I have to be emailing each and every single district to request the state assessments for all the students in their district. And they don't always prioritize if I'm requesting that data. And then sometimes I have difficulty in getting the data from that district. And so, you know, it's, for us, that's probably the hardest data element to get for us here in Ohio.
But Brenda from Colorado just said Colorado uses web services to pull multiple data elements. For example, IEP, EL assessment, and course history are pulled from the state data pipeline into the state's data system. Just to name a few, there are several other data elements pulled from other state data sources and imported into SMART. Less manual entry of data helps with invalid or incomplete data. So I think that shows that some of you might almost be able to click a button and connect. You know, you have these systems already connected, and some of you literally are doing manual entry on every single one. So I think it's really helpful to reach out to states that do have the ways that they've kind of set up data pipelines and stuff to be able to see how that's been done, to see if anything can be replicated in your state. So the question, we can always reach out as far as the COE thing. I do not know of any particular guidance about that. And so I'd be reluctant to share anything specific. Several of you saying you do not share COE information. So just, but very good question, Melina. We can definitely ask that. So moving on, M6 reports, we kind of talked a little bit about some M6 reports in the last session. I feel like there's a ton of depth to the reports and how you can use them. It's really, I think that it's just, there's just a lot of things that you can do. There's a couple comments that says some states don't even have a database that has all of these elements. So going district by district is the only method. Exactly. So we are from one end to the spectrum of another, of someone literally typing absolutely everything in to someone else being able to click and get that stuff just directly interface with their database. So I think it just shows the challenge that we all have, but we all do have access to these same M6 reports once the data is in there. So maybe in the chat box, and Gloria, if you want to share, what are your favorite M6 reports that you use, and kind of maybe how you use them. So feel free to put it in the chat box. We didn't have enough time to go through every single report. I just have examples here of account management, of like who's actually using the accounts. And you can, sometimes you have, if you're the state administrator, you're wondering what the use is, and you can literally go in and see, what the use is and how many people are logging in, and actually check by users. Another one here I have here is the QIDs and enrollment report. There's a ton of reports, but those of you that use the reports, what are your favorite ones? And Gloria, do you want to share maybe some of your favorites?
I think my favorite one is the reconciliation reports, because that shows you exactly, like we're trying to be 100% accurate, but those reports help you compare your data to their data. And when they tell you there's 7 students that we are not counting, you can see which 7 students they are, and then go in and look at that data and see, okay, well, I have so many students. What's wrong with the enrollment? Why are they not counting them? And you can literally go in and check and see those students, and maybe it was a typo in the enrollment line or something like that. You can fix that and then submit that data and then run that report again, and then you'll see where that's changed because you fixed that data. With them checking that data and your CSPR data, that's the only way to make sure you're pretty much as close as you can be to 100% accurate. So for me, the reconciliation reports are the most helpful, and are the ones that I think are the easier ones to interpret and help you with your data.
So we've got several agreeing the child reconciliation, but it does mention that it may not be updated daily. Brenda says data quality reports, M6 child count report, all dashboard reports. So there are a lot of new reports in the dashboard reports that you can kind of see. So just really, it says, Danielle says, Nebraska's being, we're not recording this. Nebraska is being federally monitored. As I'm going through the list of requested items, M6 reports are coming in handy for exactly what they're looking for in many sections, such as child mobility, general move to and from. Good, very good comments there. So I think it's, Sue makes a good point that there can be a lag from Vaughn. You just need to be aware of that, and it can explain discrepancies. So does anyone know what the lag is for that? I don't know what that.
Well, one thing you do have to wait for is your information to get sent up, and then your report to come back to say everything was accepted, that there weren't anything that they didn't accept. So once that is okay, then you can, so it may take a day or two for those changes to kick in and be shown in there. So that may be a reason why there's a lag. So just be checking those reports of when you sent it and you got it back, if all those, whatever you corrected was actually went in okay, or if there were any errors with that as well, that you may have to then fix that and then send it up again, and then like that.
So Vaughn says it depends also when your data goes up. So I've seen states where they'll say, hey, there's a problem in M6, how can I fix it? And it's like, that's your state data systems. You're fixing in your data system. The reflection is in M6 of when you do that. So like Vaughn's comment, it depends on when your data goes up. The child recon, report, I believe, lags 1 business day behind the other data, and MSIX is the child as it uses a different database. So, and then Brenda says 48 to 24 hours for updates to appear in MSIX. So if you're trying to just refresh and see it right away, you're not going to see it until that's done.
No.
But Gloria's point is on point there for us to know that you can drill down all the way down to that student and find that error. Let me scroll. So here's another, the logic issue, examples of, like you see your category 1, you thought that there were 1,000 kids, but there's excluded 435. So you definitely want to go in, figure out who that is, what's, what the reason is. Same thing for category 2. And so a lot of times later on, you're asked to explain these kind of discrepancies. So you want to make sure that you fix them beforehand. You've got those data logic reports. And then nationally, I don't know if I put it in this. No, I didn't. I don't think I have it in this. Says which, I've already asked you kind of the reports that you've really, you're really using. It seems like that data reconciliation is a favorite in the enrollments. Any other report that maybe is something that you've recently started using, or that maybe you only use in like a certain time of the year, but you found really helpful, that you might suggest to others to check out? Anybody else? So while you're thinking about that, if you want to put it in the chat box, feel free to. Then you have this whole idea of services. And so this, I feel like it would be helpful for states to see just other states' processes. How are you gathering this? How are you putting this in? What is your quality control related to these kind of things? How do you have, so we know that services, first of all, we want to make sure that we're very aware of what a service is, because this is a whole nother challenge where you have someone sends in a service log that says that they gave a hygiene bag to families. And you say, okay, is this a service or it's not? You need to be very well aware of what actually is a service, what actually counts as that, and have those protocols in place that, this is part of your state system of, hey, this is the kind of service, this is how we gather it, this is what is actually a service, and this is what's not. Because I've actually seen, in some states where it'll say, oh, well, we did this, and it's just a one-time thing. And if you go to the guidance, it would clearly be something that OME would most likely not count as a service. So just a reminder, if you're new to this and you're wondering what a service is, it says a service is something that directly benefits a migrant child, addresses a need of the migrant child consistent with your SEA's comprehensive needs assessment and service delivery plan, grounded in scientifically based research, or in the case of support services are generally accepted, and 4 are designed, sorry, I got something in front of it, to enable the program to meet its measurable outcomes and contribute to the achievement of state performance targets. So many of you are the gatekeepers. You are the ones that are putting the data in. You are making sure the data is correct. You're the ones that are going to do the CSPR. You also need to clearly know who's eligible, what counts as a service, what doesn't. So if you're brand new and you've never heard of this before, make sure you consult with the guidance. There's sections on eligibility, there's sections on services, there's a whole bunch of information for this very complex program. And what you put in, when you code it a different way, will show whether the kids are counted as served or not. And so we definitely want to make sure that you're thinking about, what works. And so we believe that all states should have systems in place to log and track the services that are happening in your state. So if you're wondering, like you can refer to the CSPR, many of you are right now up to your ears in CSPR related stuff. If you're not familiar with what the CSPR is and what's gathered, and maybe you're a local data person and you're new to this, maybe don't reach out right now while they're in the middle of this, but you can ask and see what's, but a lot of times how you're coding things directly relates to what needs to be pulled later on for the CSPR. So, and then we put a reminder that definitely there should be some quality control checks related to services also, because it counts monetarily almost, summer service, for example, equals just about the same as finding a new student. It counts double. So you want to make sure that you're truly counting those that are eligible. So one of the things that we're working with IDRC is we have a tool called Connect Team. You don't have to use Connect Team, but it's just an app that the tutor or recruiter can fill out when they do different things. But there should be some processes in place of how you're collecting those services and what it would look like. It says, would helping families or children with beds or other furniture count as a service? If so, what service code would you use? I'm going to put that out to the whole group. So that I would tell you, Feliciano, that you've got to go back and read what the guidance says as far as service. You've got to look at what your state is counting as that. And those are, for some states are going to say, no, that does not. And some you're going to have to go back and look and see how that's set up. And then your service codes are going to look different too, based on how you've set that up in your system. So just very much you want to make sure that you know what that looks like. And when we just mentioned this here, we have here that your state should have a service delivery plan of saying, hey, this is how we're going to serve kids. And so maybe they've identified some specific need for, something similar to that, but it's got to go back to what your state said you were going to do. And it should address all 4 areas of those services. So we just want to put that out because we do realize that some of you are brand new to this. So just in the chat box, and Gloria, if you want to mention how you guys do, how do you track your services that your staff are providing?
For us, they have to fill out paperwork, and it's either their service through a building program where they're getting bused to the building and then bused back home, or 2, they're being serviced through the image program, which is where a teacher goes out to the students. So they go either to the camp, to the home, maybe meet them in the library. It just depends, and they have to do at least 10 hours. So for us, 1 day in the building program would equal out to about 10 hours of service image where they go out to the student and meet with them for at least those 10 hours. So it's either or in the building or through the image program, and most of the paperwork is online, so I can go in and review and check that and see what it is that they're doing with the students. So that helps as well. We do technical assistance visits where we go out to the MEP programs and see how they're doing, help check with the paperwork, make sure that they're doing the priority for services, that there's a list of students in every classroom, and that each of the image teachers as well have their PFS list as well. So that's kind of how, I make sure I keep up with that to be able to track the services for each of our 5 regional programs.
Yeah, and I just want to say that services are going to look very, very different in each state. And so we definitely, that's something that you want to work out with your state of how you're doing that. Like Gloria just gave examples of the different ways that they're doing. So you want to, like Vaughn says, looking at the SDP, you need to make sure you are collecting data that allows you to see at a student level what the needs are, what services they're getting, and the outcomes. That's why our CNA SDP process includes state admins, other stakeholders, and our data team, as well as program evaluators. So very good comment there that aligns with that. So there are so many things in MEP that are like, it seems like it's a standalone thing, but then it's like a spider web. It's got to hook to all of these other things. And so services are, really do need to be grounded back on what, that service delivery plan and those needs that you specifically had. And so here's an example of everyone, once you're trying to pull your CSPR stuff, I've had states where you actually just pull, at one point in Tennessee, we would pull all the information that we had from MIS 2000, put it in a spreadsheet, and then we'd use, like pivot tables and stuff to check all of these different and make sure that everything equaled out. Did our, male, female equal out to our age and grade? And does it, all of these different elements to make sure. And so we have a comment. It says, from Brenda, many users struggle with continuation of services. When it should be used, recommendation to complete extensive training with your staff to ensure they know what service directly relates to the provision of services being provided. We have found that some of our users were providing extensive services, but just didn't know what services to enter in the system. Exactly. For example, an SEA continuously provides guidance on what it means to provide a service. Very good example of, so those of you that are data admins that are training other people, make sure that you have that in your mind. And that's something that you do have to have a comment of why you're continuing to serve someone. And that needs to be something built into a kind of a systems process in your state to say, we continue to serve this way because of this, and that your data staff know that process. I think we're kind of getting close to our time here. But this right now, anyone that's working on CSPR, any hints for anyone that's working on it the first time? I feel like we could have just done a presentation on just CSPR stuff. We found for us, it was really helpful to have, this report, a really comprehensive report that pulled everything. And then we did all this checks and balances to make sure that it equaled out. And so we use a lot of those pivot tables. That was something that was helpful. Any hints that you have? Yes. CSP takes a year to plan or longer. Yes, you cannot. So everything that you're pulling from CSPR has to come from data that you're getting from somewhere. It has to be entered in, or it has to be, through a data pipeline put somehow into your system. So excellent point. If you are just now starting on CSPR, there's no way that you can, do it well. But that data over and over, all of these different points, really areas need to be looked at. Kind of the last area, Brenda says advanced knowledge of Excel, kind of you're ahead on the collection and reporting of the data. Very good comment. So we also know that it's important for this demographics type data that you're getting, that you're looking at when students are coming and going. So you can impact IDNR by giving good data to your recruiters and working with your IDNR coordinators or your state directors to make sure that they have access to those data. And a lot of times what Vaughn just mentioned, knowing needs, a lot of times starts with beginning just looking at the population, any data that you possibly have, and looking for trends. So are you looking when they're coming and going? Are you looking at their housing, where they're living? What types of services are being provided? Which kids are not being served and why? Where are people coming and going from? How many students are being recruited by each recruiter? You know, and that may be, there's a lot of other data. It may be that it's a really difficult area and it's like a very bad egg hunt. They just find one here and find one here, and then another one may have lots and lots of people, but you want to understand what's going. Vaughn says, work closely with your state EdFax coordinator to set timeframes, processes, and templates for your CSPR. Very good comment. So we want you've got to be looking at all of these different elements related to data. And sometimes visualization tools are helpful. For a while, we were using a lot with Power BI, where we could actually go in and do these spreadsheets on agriculture that was available, and then spreadsheets on when people were coming and what kind of work they were doing, and to have these visualization tools that could kind of share. We're kind of running out of time for this session, and so we'll transition to our last one. We'll take about a 10-minute break. But one of those things that we want to kind of go forward is if someone has a tool that they think is really helpful, especially if they're free, if that exists, or not very expensive, if you're willing to share those kind of things, that's another area that we're really looking at. I know some states will have some dashboard visualization things that'll help them be able to go in and see what's happening. Any of these things that you can really understand your data, I think make the job better, make it so that you can be more as a resource for everyone else. And so we are going to go ahead and transition. Let's take a 10-minute break. And so at 12:15 Central Time, about 10 minutes, we'll start the last one. And the last one, it is a completely it's a meeting, so everyone you'll be able to unmute yourself and share. And we're just going to discuss more in depth a few other areas of data. But really want to thank Gloria for sharing her insights. Just so you know, she's super helpful. As you see a lot of comments from Brenda and from Vaughn, there are a lot of people that have been doing this for a long time that are huge resources for anyone that's doing data, that's wondering how different systems are done. They can be from small states or big states. And so I really encourage you to pay attention to the people that are giving suggestions and reach out. And if you're not giving suggestions and you have resources that you want to share, please share that with us. And so take a 10-minute break and then we'll have our last session. So thank you, Gloria.
Thank you. Bye.